All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1004, that's Mobile APIs and Frameworks, in the summer 2024 semester at Georgian, and it's week 5, part 2 of our broadcasting recording. And in this part, we're going to continue with what we were doing. We were setting up our API for authentication. This is kind of like the first of many parts for authentication. So again, this week, we're just setting up login, register, and configuring our API. And then next week, we're actually going to secure it with JWT. Let's get back to what we were doing. So last we left off, we kind of changed the user model so that we kind of did this. I used passport mongoose document, but this should really be, it shouldn't be this. It's, like I said to you before, it should be a passport local document. So let's change that to passport local document. I know this is something that we should be doing. And then what this does is our user schema now, if we look at it, and if we kind of load it up, it says is a mongoose model. And if I say something like and, like I said before, it's this one and passport local document, right? Once we've done this, where we say that these two things are the things that iUser is, then now suddenly if I look at user is of type passport local document, which is very important, right? Because we might need to do that later on. Also, in our app.ts, we've solved that issue thanks to Sudarshan, who suggested we just add in our type definition library, which is what we did. And again, even Copilot suggested it, but I wasn't really happy with that suggestion because we had our type definition library already. So it's kind of weird. Anyway, this looks like it's working now. And the next step is adding in our controller, right, which is what we're going to do next, for our, as an example for everything that we're doing for our user. So the configuration is done, and I want to start thinking about the controller. The controller that we want to use, and there's different strategies here, okay? So back to this, if you look here, then inside, we just did config, and inside of controller, we have a movie controller, but we want kind of a user controller. And the user controller is going to, sometimes we also call this the auth controller, that gives us, remember the controller is just a file that gives us functions. Like for example, our movie controller, what it did was it gives us all these functions to kind of access the movie model and do a find, or remove, or whatever operation we're going to do with the database. That's what we kind of did. So we wanted something like this for the user controller. So we can call it user. Sometimes we can call it auth, as an authentication controller. I like auth better because it kind of gives me more information about what I'm doing. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to make a new file. And we're going to call this auth, as in authentication.ts, right? And what I want to start thinking about is how to process registration, as well as processing a login and processing the logout. Those are the three things I want to add in here to the authentication controller, right? So just like before, it's still a controller. And if I looked at my movies controller, we know at the top we have express. We still need to do this part. So this part has to come in. And if I go back to my auth controller and put that in, that's the first line. Okay, so that's the first thing we're doing is we're making a controller. And then of course, what we want to do is we want to definitely add in passport because that's new. So I'm going to just type that in, import. And again, we're going to say passport from passport, because what this is going to do is allow us to use passport methods, right? And I don't know if I need this, but I'm going to add in mongoose as well. So I'm going to say import mongoose from mongoose. We'll see if we need that. It may or may not need that later on. And the last one, of course, is the user model. So I'm going to say import user for models user. So this is going to give us access to the user model itself. So those things are kind of the imports at the top. The next piece that we want is we want to create a function for processing our registration. So we're going to say something like exports, and we're going to say function is process process registration. And then what we want to pass in is a request, which is the request object, the response, which is the response object. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. And the next, which is of type next function. There we go. And then, of course, this is going to return void. That's what it's going to do. It's not returning anything. And then what we want to do is start thinking about a user. So I want to instantiate a new user object. That's what I want to do. I want to instantiate a new user object. And for that, I'm just going to say kind of like this. I think this is pretty good, right? But maybe in our form, instead of me getting the display name directly from our form, maybe the display name is like first name, last name. So it won't quite be like this. It'll be something like request.body .first name plus space and request.body.last name. So maybe our form that we might have in our mobile app is going to have a couple things: a username, email address, first name and last name, and then the display name comes from our first name and last name. Okay, that's what it comes from. Okay, so that's the first thing. So first we make this new user object, and then the next thing we want to do with a new user object is think about creating a register. So we're going to say user.register, and we want to register with our new user. And we're also going to pass in the request.body.password. Notice that we never store the password as part of the user model, right? We also want to have any kind of errors come out. So that's the first part. So we're going to use this structure, right? That's the first part. So user register is going to actually call the passport local model. That's why we actually have to make it user. User register is part of passport local model, right? And passport local document, and it allows us to do the registration process, right? So next, we're going to say that, and by the way, we can pull this curly brace down here just to keep it so that it is on the same line. And we can say something like, okay, cool, if we have an error, then what do we want to do with that error, right? Well, what we want to think about is what type of error it is, right? So if it's a validation error, like for example, if somehow you haven't entered all the fields. So if error is an instance of, right, is an instance of a mongoose.error validation error, then what I want to do is I want to say something like a couple things. So console error, and I don't want to put the error out in the console. I want to say something like all fields are required. All fields are required, because all fields are required, right? So that's the first thing. That's what's going to go to the console. And a res JSON error. Now it's saying a 400 kind of error, where we want to send a message. So success is false back to the client, right? The message is, some kind of error. That's what we want to say. And something that we want to tell the user. So maybe we want to know that what happened, right, as an example. So we want to say something like user not registered, right? And we want to say all fields are required. And so we give a message back to the client that tells the client that this is the problem, right? Because if you don't enter all the fields, this is one error we can possibly get. Okay. By the way, it gives us a little underline. It says not all code paths return a value. Don't worry about that. Let's keep going. Okay. Next, what about if it's an error, a different kind of error? So if I said if it's an error, as an example, some other error comes up that is not a validation error, then what is that kind of error going to be, right? So we're going to just kind of do this. And what I want to do in here is we're just dealing with some possibilities here. That's what we're doing, right? So the next error is console error. that we want to pump out, and we want to say something like, okay, so error, and we want to say something like inserting new user. So somehow we have a problem actually inserting the user in the database. We can't do it somehow. Maybe we're not connected to the database. Maybe the database, we're trying to do it with a different kind of thing, you know, and there's different reasons. Maybe the user, it already exists. So we can say if error.name, if the error name is the user exists error, then we want to say something in the console, only in the console, but not to the user, not you know, to the, we don't want to return this one. But this is for us to know, like what the problem is, okay? The developer. But we don't want to show error user already exists. We want to say something like return res and status 400 is okay. But instead of like user not registered, you know, as an example, we can say we don't want to give this information already exists, because this way that we give information, this is too much information for the user, because if they have this and if they're a hacker, they can keep on trying different users until there's not a new user. Sorry, until there's not a user exists error. They found something else that doesn't exist, right? So error, user not registered successfully is what we can say. User not registered is what we had. We don't want to give too much information more than that. The user just didn't get registered, okay? Then, so these are a couple of errors we've dealt with, but what if there's no error? Then we want to return passport, right? And we can actually authenticate, you know, the user directly, like immediately when they log in. So when they register, we can authenticate them right away as well. Otherwise, if there's no error, the user just registered. We don't have to do anything like this. We don't have to do anything else. We can just say, you know, if user is registered, if there's an error, do something with the errors, and then do nothing else. Or if we want to, we can just we can authenticate the user right away. Like, so we can say something like passport authenticate. We want to use the local strategy as an example, and here, let me just move these out to where they should be. Right? We can do this, and we can say that this also needs a semicolon. There we go. And so what we can do is we can say something like return res.json, where success is true, user logged in successfully. Because that's what we're doing. We're actually logging in the user right here, okay? And the data that we're sending back is the user that we're kind of outputting, so say new user. So we can actually show, we can show the data here for us, the data of the user that's been successfully logged in. This is something we can change. We don't need this dot. There we go. This is something we can change later. Like, we don't have to show the entire user information, just the username, let's say, right? But for now, what I'm doing is I'm showing everything so we can do some troubleshooting later. Okay, so that is your registration. So that is user registration, this part right here. Process registration, that's the registration function, and then we can register a new user. Now, in order for us to test this, we need a root, right? So again, back to our drawing board. We don't need this controller anymore. We don't need app.ts or db.ts or movie.ts. We can get rid of all those things, right? Because those are just things we use. We have the user model here. We can probably just not use that right now. So this is our auth.ts that we're using. So we've closed down some of those editors. What I need to do now is think about routing. Where do I want that to be? Should it be on the index? And my feeling is it probably should, right? Because right now we're just getting our first thing, our first root, right? So let me talk about this for a second. So roots is a funny thing, right? We can split our roots down further, right? And right now our root includes, you know, kind of getting and adding and deleting and all this kind of stuff of these things. And now you might argue that not all of this should be included in our index root, right? Maybe we need a movie root eventually where we can, you know, kind of take that entire route, especially things like adding and updating and deleting, these three little endpoints. and we put them somewhere else where we can kind of safeguard those endpoints and only allow those things to be done if the user's logged in. For now, only for now, what we want to do is just make it work, and for testing purposes, we're going to keep it in one file. Later on, from our roots perspective, we may come back in here and split this up a little bit, okay? And I'm doing this because, again, time. So these are our list of movie roots. That's what these are, kind of movie roots, right? But we also want to have a list of authentication roots. That's what they are, right? So let's do that. So here is list of authentication roots. There we go. And then the first authentication root is going to be a router.post, where we're going to do a /register, right, where we're going to pass in the request, response, and next object here. And we're going to just actually go here, and what we want to do with this one is a quick fix, which is going to be add an import from controllers auth. And so what this does now is it adds a new import from my authentication controller, not from my movie controller, which processes the registration. Process registration is a function that exists there. We're just importing that, and we're using it here. So that's what the register root does. Okay, now that we have the register root, we can test it with Postman. Let's try this out. Now remember what we need. Let me just make sure this is saved. Remember what we need to do this, all right? If we look at our auth controller, we need a form that has username, email address, first name, last name, and a password. That's what we need, okay? If we don't have these things, then, and only then, we won't be able to do those things. We won't be able to register, or it'll give us an error, okay? Let's try it out and see if this works. So back to Postman, right? I'm not going to update with that right now. I'm going to go and add in a new request. We're going to make it so it is a post type request. The link is going to be local because we're testing locally right now. So we're going to say localhost, right? 3000 /API/register. And the register root needs more information, a body of some kind, right? And the body is going to be this, which is a URL encoded body. And here we can start adding in our stuff. So we need username. And let's define the, an admin user. Let's say, for example, my value is going to be admin, okay? That's the username. And let's also add a password. And my password for admin is going to be 123456, 3456, right? The first name, make sure you spell it correctly, first name like this, all right? We're going to make it admin. And the last name, we're going to make this blank. We're going to leave it blank. Let's see what happens, because I only want one of these things to be made, because it makes first name and last name to make the display name. Okay, we also need email address. We know we need that. Let me just kind of go down here and make this a little bigger. So we'll say email address. That's what we've asked for. Email address is going to be something like admin for now @example.com. There we go. So that we have everything we need to register, if I'm not wrong. Let's check to make sure that we're good. So back to this. And the way to check this is if we go to the user model. Let's go to the user model for a second. Because remember, these are required fields that we've kind of put together. So if we go to models, and if we look at the user model, then you can see that the required fields that we have are username, email address, display name, which we're creating, right? And that's it. Username, email address, and display name. There is no password. But in the controller, which is in the auth controller, we need the username, email address, and display name. And the display name is going to be created by request.body.firstname plus a space plus request.body.lastname. What if we don't have this? Then will this crap out? Will this be empty? We'll see, right? One thing to note is we've added in a last name in our in here. So we actually put last name in and we entered nothing, which is going to give me an empty value. It's not going to give me null. If I uncheck this, it'll give me null. But if I check it and give me nothing, then I can create the admin user with no last name. That's what it's going to do, right? Email address is required. admin@example.com is what we're going to be using. So we have all the details of what we need to do. Now it's a matter of, will it work? Let's send this thing and see what happens. So we send it, and success. Okay, let's see what we got. So success is true. And take a look at that password. So the password is using salt, and a hash. That's actually that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's what this is. It's been converted into a password. Display name is admin space. That's okay, right? And admin is the username. Now we have this valid user, and this user, the reason we got success is because this has gone up to MongoDB Atlas. Let's check that. So back to our code here. I'm going to go back to MongoDB Atlas to check. So MongoDB Atlas. If I look that up and I want to log in to MongoDB Atlas, I'm just going to click this link. It's going to ask me to log in again, which is totally fine. It says accept cookies, sure. And I'm sign up, no. I have signed up already. I'm going to sign in. I don't want to register. Sign in, that's what I want to do. And I'm signing in with Google. I've already set that up. And then we should see the last thing we were doing together, which is our MDEV1004 project, right? There it is, MDEV1004 this semester. And you can see that now we can do things like browse a collection. There's browse a collection. And then what we can do when we browse in collections is we want to see the users collection. There's the users collection. And we have one user document called admin with the display name of admin. Now, if we want to clean this up, because it's our admin user, we can actually edit it up here, right? And I can remove the space. So inside of our display name, right, I can kind of remove that space, right? I've removed the space now, and then I can click update. And what it'll do is it will remove that extra space there from the end of the display name, because this is a special user we're making right now for our project, the admin user, okay? But it is up on MongoDB, which is awesome. All right, so that worked. Now this is great. We can put this up on GitHub. I'm just going to go here and control backtick, and I'm just going to put that up on GitHub. So git add dot, git commit -m for message, and we're going to say that added user registration. That's what we've done, and then git push. There we go. So that is user registration done, and we're ready to go with the next piece. All right, awesome. We've got this piece done. Let's do the next one. So now that we've got this piece, I want to create my other process. We processed registration. That's what we did there. Let's also now export a function to process the login. That's what we want to do with the same request response and next object. I'm just going to take this part here and copy paste it, this part, because that's the same. And what I want to do is think about how this is going to work, right? So just like last time, you know, and then of course Copilot is suggesting some stuff. Again, it's not necessarily wrong. It might just be incomplete. So I'm giving you the stuff that works for me, right? Copilot may be okay. I find that sometimes it's a little old. Sometimes it gives some help, like it just did, right? So let's talk about that. So I want to do a passport.authenticates. So that's kind of what we did automatically where we authenticated. I want to use local authentication, and I want to do an error, which is of type any, as well as a user, which is of type any for now. and info, which is also of type any. Okay, I'm going to talk about any in a second. Any is bad, actually. If we use any, what happens is we're not really using TypeScript, and I'll talk about why for now. We start with this, okay? Start with this. So now that we have this piece, the authentication piece, the next part is, what if there are errors? Are there any errors that we're encountering? And if there are, we want to check for those first. So are there server errors? Are there any server errors? I like that. And the way to check that is if error, then we can do this. We can say that if there's an error, then console error, that's what we want to do, right? We want to say return, res status 400, some kind of error that we're going to do. And then it says success is false, message, error, and then we can say server error, data is null. Notice how that kind of played out because we have those three pieces, success, message, data. And we're always going to give back that information, success, message, data, over and over again. All right, how about login errors? That's server errors. Are there any login errors? I like that one, right? So, and how this would look is if there's not a user, if the user doesn't exist somehow. So if the user does not exist, that's the next part, then, we can say that console log is, login error, the user is not found. And when we pass this back to the client, we also wanted to say something like, user login error. You don't want to give too much information because if we say the user is not found, then they're going to hammer the server again to try and find a user that is found. Okay, that's one thing that we don't want our malicious users to have a chance to do. There might be some malicious actors out there, bad actors, that they are going to keep hammering stuff, and they want to look for these messages because if the server tells you that there's no user, you're going to try again until you find a user to hack, as an example. So let's not do that. Let's go back now and then do the login process. So that's the next part. So we're going to say rec.login, request login. And the login, you can use actually lowercase in, log in, like this. And we're going to pass in the user. We're also going to show that there might be an error, another kind of error that's here. And what we want to do is, here's our request login. What type of errors are there? What if there are database errors, right? So are there any database errors, right? And if there are, then we want to kind of respond with a database error. We're going to say something like, okay, console log, error, right? And then the success is going to be false, right? Because that's a problem. What we want to say is error, database error, some kind of error in the database. We don't know what that database error could be. We could specialize. We can find out exactly what it is, and we'll know in the console log what that is, okay? And then next, right, let's just put this little curly brace. I don't like it there. I like it there. That's just me. And I think I did the same thing here. I'm going to take this little curly brace and put it here. So this is the first part. So if there's an error, then do something. But the next part is, what if we're good, right? So if we're responding good, then let's respond true. So we'll say, okay, so if we're good, if we have a front end, it could be Angular, it could be React, it could be a mobile user interface. We'll say something like res JSON, right? Success is true. Message, user logged in successfully. This is good. Data, and we want to pass in the user data for now. Okay. Again, the user data, we may not want to show the entire thing, only maybe the username or something else in the future. For now, we're just testing, so we're going to do this. So we're going to do one of these, right? Semicolon. And at the bottom, this is new. We're going to pass in the request, the response, and next object, because what this is going to do is it's going to self-call this function, and it's going to allow us to perform the authentication. So this is this whole part. So this whole part is process login. Now, one thing it does tell us is that it says here, it says, what happens if, it says, no, not all code paths return a value. Well, because what if this fails? There's nothing that's returned, right? What if this fails, right? Nothing is returned there either. These are not wrong. Then request login, what if you can't log in, kind of thing. So we have a return value here, and for me, this is normally good enough. but I always like to respect those warnings. So that's the first thing. Next, now that we have a function that does this, this is our function, right? We have a bit of a warning. Don't worry about that for now, right? And then if it looks for a quick fix, a lot of times they'll tell us. Now, user is any, what if I made this user an iUser, right? So if I said user is of type iUser, problem with that approach is now the user data we're going to get back is going to be, it's going to check to see if the user exists that way. So for now it's any, we're going to come back to that. Okay, we can change that later on. Now let's do this. So now that we've got this, let's go back to our index and create another route so we can log in, right? So we had our, again, our controller, and what we want now is the route to help us, perform the login function. Okay, so let's try this. So we're going to go back to here, and so here's our authentication. So we're going to say, by the way, this is register user. That's what that is. And now we want to log in our user, right? So login user is correct. And we want to do a router.post where we're going to do a login request response and next with the process login function we just created. And again, I want to go to quick fix and I want to update the import from controllers auth. And what this is going to do is going to add process login function here in alphabetical order from the controllers auth. We're importing that, and that allows us to do the process login. Okay. Okay. So what do we need for login? We need username and password. That's what we need for those two things. And how do I know this? Because if I go back to the authentication piece, right, then at the top, right, we're going to use our username and password for this. So passport authenticate, local authentication, that's what it's going to do. Local authentication means we must have a username and password. So we need a user, that's part of it. And the username and password is going to provide that information. So let's make sure that I didn't miss anything. I'm just going to check my notes, because it's very important that we have that. If we don't have those things, then we won't be able to log in. We will not be able to log in, which is something that I don't want to have problems with. Yeah, I've got it correct. So let's do that now. So we need username and password, and username and password will create a user object and allow us to check, verify that the user exists. Okay, let's try this out. So again, back to Postman, and we're going to make a new request. Here it is. And the new request object is going to be another post request type, post. Here it is, post. And now we're going to do localhost 3000 and then login. We need two pieces of information from our body. So body on it, URL encoded. We need a username, admin, and a password, which is 123456. Right? So we're going to try both things. We're going to try and make it so that we can't log in a second, but let's try this first. Let's see if it works first. So send that information on, and if everything works, it says error, please use /API. Good. This is good. So I messed that up. /API/login. Let's try it again. And this time it says true, users logged in successfully, and it gives us the entire user data. Okay, again, this is just for testing purposes. So we know we're getting the right data, and we got the information from the server. The display name is admin with no space, which means it got the latest version that we updated in the server. Okay, so that's what it did. Okay, so that's pretty good. We were able to log in. What happens if I change the information? If I do something like instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I change it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I click send, then it should give me an error, right? Let's take a look here. It says success false, message error, login error. It doesn't tell you what it is, but it tells you there's a login error. And if we check our server, let's go back to here, and if we check the server logs actually tell us more information because we've kind of done this. Look, it says login error, user not found, right? So this is not really true, right? The user was found, we just didn't give the correct password. So credentials is what we want to say. So when we're logging in, instead of saying, you know, login error, user not found, user credential failure is what we really want to say here. User credential, that's error. User credentials error, right? Which is what this is. It's a special, you know, it's the credential or no user, or user not found. So one of the two, right? We can define what that is. If we check to see what the error is, like what error we're getting, we can check to see what that error is, then we can define what that is more clearly. Okay, so that's something we can do. Save. And if I go back to this and I try it again, you'll get that new error now. Look. So instead of doing that, if we try again, it says error refused. Let's make sure that it's transpiled. Sometimes it takes a second to transpile, my friends, and that's why we're getting that error. So there it is, finally connected. Let's try it and do that again, right? So if I click on send, now that it's connected, then we should get a request that says, instead of login error, right? Now it says login error, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's pretty good, okay? And what about if it's not admin? What if I do something else, like Tom? I put something else, like I mean, a username and password is completely wrong. Okay, let's see if I do that. And if I do that, it says error, login error. Again, to me, anything like that's nebulous like this that doesn't tell us anything is important. But now there's two different errors we're going to get. Let's see what the server says. Back to the server. So the server says user credentials error or user not found twice, right? One of them was my username, my password was wrong, and the other one was, well, there's no error like, there's no user like that. So if I want to be more specific, I could give more of a specific error here by checking the error code. Okay, so this is good. It's working. I like it. And I want to go back to here and let's try and put everything back in just to make sure that it works. So I'll say something like admin. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's the proper password, and click send. And you can see now we should be able to log in, no problem. There's my login message, success is true. We get full data for the entire user. Of course, there's too much information. And we're going to remove this information you know, later on. But now for now, this is good. And we can go back to our API and we're going to go here and we're going to just put it up on GitHub. So git commit -m for message, and we'll say added login functionality. Now, I want to point out that even though we've logged in and registered, there's no way to secure your routes right now because we don't have state. We can't take care of state right now on the API, right? Sure, you're logged in, but where do we store that information? There are a couple ways to do this, and we're going to talk about one of the ways next week. We could store your login state. So for example, if you're a user, you need to send your information, your user information every single time you access the object. You need to send over a request with some kind of authentication information about who you are. One way of doing that, of course, is sending a token, which we're going to generate next week. Okay? Today, we're not doing that. Today, instead, what we're going to do is we're just going to finish off our routing, and then next week we'll do all that and clean up some of our code. Okay, so that's cool. I've got my authentication, you know, my process login route, which is pretty good. I like that one. I'm just going to collapse this one as well. We just have one more to do, which is our logout. Logout's actually quite easy, believe it or not. So it's going to be called process logout. So again, export function process logout. I like what it says here in terms of request, response, and next. I'm just going to grab these here, this kind of signature. This is our function signature. And what I want to do with process logout, like we normally do, is I want to do a request logout. This is correct, partially. So we're going to request.logout. And what we want to do here is we want to say that, well, what happens if there is an error? I want to say, well, after the logout is true, we're going to say something like okay, success is true, user logged out successfully, data null. Now we could also pass the user that we've logged out, but I'm not going to do that here. And so that's the first thing. So we're going to request logout with a console with a console log instead of a request object where we return, right? We're actually going to do this in a separate thing here. So we're not going to do this here. We're actually going to do this part down here. So I like to do it in a separate thing where I say return res JSON. I want to do this part. Now this is if there's no error, I'll do this part, right? So this is what this does. I also want to do a console log. So a console log, user logged out successfully, which is what we want to keep track of. This is good. So this is if the logout is successful. We could also track somehow if the logout is not successful. For example, somehow you disconnected from the server or whatever. Okay, but for now, this is pretty much all we need, all right? And if I save this part, and if I go to my index route again, and I want to make a logout route, right? So again, I want to log out the user, then I'm going to do a router.post, or sorry, router.get, that's all we need. And we're going to kind of process the logout. This is incorrect. See what this does? And it's also going to redirect us. There's none of that, right? We don't want to do this. This is where Copilot's guessing wrong. So we're going to say process logout. I can actually click on that and it'll import it for me with the request response and next object. And that's what we needed to do. Now it's a get request because we don't need to do actually anything. We're not sending anything from a form. We're not, we don't have to go to a form to get the user information to log out. We're just using a get request for this. Okay, so save. And let's try this out to log out the user here. And all we're doing is sending messages to the server saying log in, log out. That's all we're doing right now. We're not actually performing logout because again, we don't have any security set up yet. All right, so let's try this. We'll say again, localhost 3000 /API/logout. So all we have to do is just that. And as long as we type it properly, which I'm not typing it. There we go. That's it. If we just do this, this should just work now. And if I click send, if I did everything correctly, then we should get a response that says, hey, you're good, you're logged out, right? All right, so this is interesting. I said API logout, and I'm getting false. A valid ID is requested to retrieve a movie. Huh. So logout, let's go back and fix my route. Here's logout. There's login. What happened? How come this is not working? What do you think that is? So think about what we're doing, right? We have an ID, right? And this ID could be the ID that we're looking for the movie. That's what we're saying there. But here we're doing this logout /logout, and somehow router.get isn't getting to process the logout because it's kind of looking here and it's saying, man, sorry, you're trying to do something with, it's kind of looking at like this router.get, which is very similar because we don't know what that ID, and that ID could be a string value, right, as an example. And that's why it's causing us to have an issue. So what about order? Does it matter the order is the question. Like we did our movie routes here, right? Here we're returning it by ID. What if I move these routes? Do you think that'll help? I move these routes up. So I don't put them here, but I put them like up here. Is that something that might help us, from an order perspective? Does order matter when it comes to routing? Because there's my logout, right? So let's see, right? So here's the move. And then if that works, what about if I have an ID, as an example, will this work? Do I have to change this path because, find, do I want to do find and then an ID? Is that going to help me? Because right now it's just anytime I put something in there, it's going to suggest that it's an ID, right? So let's try this out. So first of all, does order matter, right? And if I go back to logout and if I press send, let's just make sure that everything is finished compiling. And restarted, there it is, restarted. Let's see what happens if I click send. So does order matter? And it says user logged out successfully. It matters. Okay, but what if I want to go back to that get request way back over here where we're looking for a user. It looks like this. How about then? Does that still work? And it says, look, success false, movie not found. Well, let's see if we can find a movie. So I'm going to just look at some movies here. And I want to look at this one. So that's the movie I want to find. And I want to make sure that this one, this request shows that movie. There we are. And if I click on send, can I find that movie still? And so, yeah, it's okay. So order matters. Order matters. Like that means that I must have my authentication routes first before I'm doing this. Because if I do this, you can see that I can log out successfully, right? And everything is good. But it works because I, look at this first. That's just how I've structured my my routing. So if I had, these routes here, if I put them at the bottom, then these routes get processed first, and then these routes get processed. That's interesting. Which means I should do this in my index router, and if I want to do my movie routes, all of this stuff, if I was going to move this to another file, as an example, should be in my configuration. So if I go back to my config, and if I go to my app.ts, here's my app.ts. And if I go here, notice that /API is index router, right? Well, if I want my auth router or my movie router to have a separate route, I would put it second. I would have my index router here, and underneath that I would have a movie router down under bottom. Second, because order matters. If I want to keep this same route the way this looks like right now. Another way to do this is to fix this by putting in something like find, like this, right? Where I want to find by ID, right? So now this is more descriptive because I want to find a movie like this by ID. I think maybe this is more safe, right? So this is like find movie by ID. That's what that is, right? And to test this new route, because that's more realistic, I go back to here again, and this is an incorrect route. So this should give me an error now. Let's check this out, see if it gives me an error. And it should, right? It's going to say, sorry, I don't know what you're doing here, but API as a route prefix, it's giving me this error, right? And what I really need is, it's got to be /find/, and that's going to be the new API. So if I click send, then you can see now I'm going to get that movie. And that makes more sense. So now I can't really make a mistake by doing one of these because logout was being interpreted as it was being looked at as if it was the movie, right? So now the order doesn't matter anymore. I can put that back where it was and it's going to be okay, if that makes sense. All right, so we're almost done. What I want to do here is a couple things. We've finished the logout, so we can do that. So we're going to go back to here. We can say git add dot, git commit -m, and we're going to say added logout functionality. Now again, all of this stuff that we have, we're going to modify next week. Git push. One thing we don't have is documentation, right? So remember what I always try and push you guys to do is in your auth, we have now a couple of these functions. So what I want to do is kind of produce a document this that tells me what this thing is. So process the registration request. That's pretty good. I also want to do the same thing here, right? Where I process the login requests. That's important to do. And then same thing with our logout, which is I want to process the logout request. So that's a little bit of documentation, and this is kind of what it's also doing for us is helping us with documenting this thing. So if I kind of hover over, it tells me what this thing does. And what this does for us, if I save it, and if I go back to my index route, and if I hover over one of these things, it actually tells me that. Like this function displays a single movie, right? Delete movie. This function deletes a movie from the database. It tells me that kind of stuff, right? And same thing with this, process the registration request. So even though it's self-evident, a router.post that's register, and it says process registration, so the name is descriptive, but also we have, if you hover over, it also gives a description of what this thing does. All right, good. So we added some documentation. Let's put that up on GitHub. So git add dot, git commit -m, we'll say added documentation to auth controller. Okay, so we did git push. You can see we have like several pushes now for this just one in-class exercise, and it's something that we need to do. Okay, last piece. We need to test this online because we've done this locally. Everything works locally now. We want to test this so that it works remotely. However, there is a problem I want to point out to you. And the problem is that we have a new environment variable that we have called app secret, right? And we must have this app secret variable loaded up into render in order for our things to work properly. Okay, so let's put this up first. So again, I'm going to go to render.com. Last part, guys. So here's render, right? And log into render like normal. So here's my dashboard. And what I want to do, right, with render.com is I want to go to my project, right? Here's this first. So before I put this up, I'm going to go to this, right? And on the left, there's environment, right? And what I want to do is I want to add that new environment variable in. So I want to add an environment variable. Here it is. The name of the environment variable I'm going to grab from here, app secret, right? And put that in there. And for now, the secret is like really dumb. It's just this, right? That's the secret, some secret, right? And it's also you want to take the entire thing, not just this, but because it's a string. I'm just going to take this whole thing and just kind of put it in here. It is actually a string. I'm just going to take this. It's been cast as a string anyway, so just that part is all you need. Let's put that in there. All right, so some secret, and then save changes. Now, when we do that, what it's going to do is it's going to reboot the server, right? As soon as I save change, if I add an environment variable, then if you go back to the dashboard here, you're going to see that it's going to be redeploying, right? Notice it's being deploying again, right? Because we've changed an environment variable. That's what happens, okay? Next, what we want to do. After we've done this, let's create our new, we update our API. So remember that in our operating system, we have ICE5, but we also have a separate site that we're using called MDEV API. So I recommend having something separate like this too, because it allows us to play with our in-class exercise and not affect this one whatsoever. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into in-class exercises, and I want to grab everything that's inside of here, including node modules, please, because now we're going to update everything. It's not going to go up online anyway, but just grab it all. It's all this. Copy it. And I'm going to go back to here, and inside of my API, I'm going to get rid of everything except for the .git folder, the hidden .git folder. So you can just get rid of all that, or you can just copy paste over it if you really want. But what I want to do is, once I've deleted everything here, there we go. Then I want to copy everything in there. There's the new stuff, right? That I just got from my in-class exercise 5. You can see it's copying from in-class exercise 5 to my MDEV1004 API. And I'm only doing this because I want to keep them separate. If you had a project in real life, you might just be doing it directly from your project to a staging site that you'd be cutting over when you're making these changes. Right now, we're not doing that because it's for learning purposes, but in real life, you wouldn't do it quite like this. Okay, but the idea is the same. Okay, so we're doing it, and once this is done, we want to pull that into our Visual Studio Code and put it up. Okay, for this in-class exercise, one thing I did last time is I allowed you guys to submit your in-class exercise without a link to your online render link, I need you to give me the link for render to this time around so I can check it out. And that just like you did for assignment 1, right? So, so here, now I've done this, and I'll talk about that in a second. I want to pull this into Visual Studio Code. So here we're done now with this part. Let's just close these off. We don't need this anymore. And what we want to do now is we want to pull in MDEV API in here instead. Okay. And MDEV API says all this stuff, right? And all we're going to do is we're going to push this right now. I'm not going to change anything else just to make it simple. You could if you want, but what I'm going to do is instead of this, there's nothing to do. You don't have to transpile or anything because it's already ready to go. I'm going to clear, and I'm going to do a git add dot, and this changes all those things. Notice it says that git commit -m, and we'll say updated API with ICE5 functionality, just so we know why we're updating it, okay? And then once we've done this, I'm going to do a git push, right? And this will push our API to our the stuff online, right? And what this is going to do is trigger another deployment on render. So if I go back to render, then if I refresh, it's going to trigger another deployment. So now it's deploying again. Let's take a look at that. If I actually click on that link, it says, okay, deploy, and it says, you know, updated API with ICE5 functionality. That was my last commit. So I click on deploy, and you should see, you can watch the log and see what's happening. Okay, so see how it's going on, all right? So it fetches packages and all this kind of stuff. For the people that are here, I know I've got a few of you, a couple here. Any questions? Sudarshan, are you good with all this stuff? Tanya?
Yes, Professor.
All right, pretty straightforward stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, all we're doing is prepping, and this is going to help you with your assignment 2. That's all I'm giving you. I'm just giving you piece parts for assignment 2. You can actually start doing assignment 2 and put most of it together so you don't have to wait for me. You know, that's why I'm giving you this stuff. And also, you get marks for doing your homework and practicing, right? So I think it's really good for you guys.
Okay, Professor.
Thanks. And you can see that sometimes one thing I have to mention again is that render.com is best effort. Remember, you're not paying for it, guys. It's free. So it takes some time. So that's why I always say, don't wait until the last minute to do this. Don't do this at like Sunday night at 11:50, because it could take 10 minutes. It could take 20 minutes. It could take half an hour to do this part. You never know how long it's going to take. And it says that your free instance will spin down within activity, and there's a delay usually for even the build process. So don't wait for this to happen, okay? Okay, on that, while we're doing this, I'll let this go. I just want to talk about one more time as we're going to stop now. We're pretty much done. Remember next week, I just want to remind you guys for the video. Remember next week that for next week, we will not be in class. I will not be physically here at Georgian, nor will I be online synchronous. So I'm not going to put a new Zoom meeting out next week. I have something to attend next week. I have a function to attend to, and I will be putting out the video asynchronously. So it'll be out there for you guys. I will notify you. I'll send you a little notification on Blackboard as well as Discord, and it'll tell you that please check the video, or the video has been released or whatever. And then you can look for in-class exercise 6, as well as information about your midterm test, which is going to come up the week after. Okay. Again, the midterm test will be done fully online. That means people who like to come in, you don't have to. I will be here on week 7, and what I'm going to do is talk about the midterm test. I will release it on the Sunday, chances are, right? And then on the Thursday, if there's any questions about what I want you guys to do, and when I release it, by the way, I'll see if I can make a short video for you guys too, to tell you what I'm looking for on the Sunday. And then on the Thursday, I will also come up on Zoom, and if you have any questions, you can certainly go through it with me, and I'll help you out. I won't be recording that session, right? So I won't be recording. I won't be recording like anything that's going on the Thursday. It's just for us to talk and all that kind of stuff, just in case you have any issues. Still meet, and if anyone shows up within the first 15 minutes, I'll be here. If not, then I'll just go silent, and then you can connect with me on Discord or book some time. Okay? So that's what's going on next week and the week after. Remember, we have 2 weeks, and then after that we have a week off during mid-semester break, and then we're back during week 8. That's like course week 8, where we start talking about how to connect to our API with a user interface like iOS or Android. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Let's see if this thing finished. Maybe it did, or maybe it didn't. Look at that. See how long it takes? So guys, please be aware of this. It can take a long time for this to happen, right? It says live. Let's see if it actually went live. So dashboard. It says deployed. Let's test it now. So last part. So again, you're going to test this in locally as well as remotely. So again, the way to do that is use our couple things. If I go here to this, and I can see that there is the link right here. I can grab that link, and I can go back to our Postman, and let's make another request, and let's do that again. Let's make sure that we can do those things. So actually, what I can do is I can go back and change some of these ones. So I can let's try and register the same user like we did last time. This should give us an error, which is a good thing, right? So I can just replace this part from here instead of localhost, right? I'm going to take the 3000 out and just put in this, which is basically MDEV. This is the render thing. Just replace this thing now, and if I click register with the same information, again, I'm trying to register a user that's called admin, right? Then it should fail because there is no, we can't register the same user twice. Let's see if that works. So send. We should get a response that says false, user not registered. Now, what does it do on render? So if I go back to render, and if I want to look at the logs, you can look at the logs on render, and you can see what happened. It says error inserting new user. User already exists. That's what we have, what we've seen just now. See that? Isn't that neat? And it gives it all in red because it is a user error. Okay? We're also getting a weird memory store error, and we're going to fix this problem next week, because memory store means that because we're using sessions, and what sessions do is we're trying to store everything on the server, and we're having a problem because what's going to happen is it says designed for a production environment as it will leak memory. How do we fix this problem if we're going to not want to leak memory? I'll fix this problem next week with you guys. All right? But I know the error, and I know how to fix it. Okay, so this is what's happened. Let's try it again now, and let's register a new user. So instead of admin, we can just change this to something that makes sense. So I'll say Thomas, right? That's my weird alias, right? And let's change it so that we're going to make a new user. We'll use the same password, fine. And the first name is going to be like, Thomas, and we'll make a funky last name, Smythe, Thomas Smythe, and we'll change the email address to, so thomas.smythe@example.com. So this is a new user we want to register. Okay, click, and let's click send. And if everything goes well, then we should be able to register a new user online, and it's going to MDEV API, and there it is. User logged in successfully. Here's this guy that I did, right? And his name is Thomas Smythe, right? Thomas Smythe. Very nice. So that totally worked online. And now that we've tested it, I want you guys to show me that this is working online through, again, maybe not all of them, like log in and register. I just kind of did it once. But logging out. How about logging out? So we did log out, and let's do that one. So I want to kind of come here, and we want to just replace this part with a path for our render. And if I click send, then we should see user logged out successfully. And again, you can check the logs. So go back to render. And then if you check the log, you can see there's register, right? There's the register log. And then if I refresh, it should show us the logs for everything we did. So there it is. So look, it did a register, and then it did a logout. There's a logout, and then we can see that everything worked just fine. Okay, so that is the stuff for today. We can check logs. Logs are really helpful on render. It gives us all the information that we normally get locally, but it also helps us determine if there's any issues. Awesome. Okay, and that's it for me today, guys. Please, again, take a look at the in-class exercise 5 description, as it'll give you all the things you need to be successful with in-class exercise 5. But that's all I want to talk about today. Any questions from our friends online? Sudarshan and Tanya?
No, Professor.
All
No
right.
questions.
That's good. Thank you so much. And I'll see you guys next week. I will stop recording. Actually, I'll see you guys next week on video. I won't see you guys next week live. But thank you so much, and we'll see each other soon.